I'm going to hand over now to Ieuan, who has been doing amazing work with colleagues at the University of Staffordshire. I've had the great pleasure of visiting several times and have learned a huge amount from the team there. Ieuan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning, colleagues. Like Jackie and Jane, I could talk for days, I think, and certainly it's tempting to get drawn to try and answer some of the questions, but I'm going to try and keep this very high level, just to really share how we're approaching the whole concept of being a civic university and how it's very timely that the civic agreement helps us to focus that work. I'm going to go through quickly. The slides will be available later, as Paul has said. So, like many universities, the concept of being civic and connected to our place is not new and hasn't been prompted now by the Commission. We have positioned ourselves as a connected university, which I think speaks to the fact that we see a very strong connection with our place. And as part of our current strategy, we're now at a phase, as others will be, where we're starting to think towards our next strategy, which will be towards 2030. So something I did want to emphasize is this isn't a sort of strand of work which is led just by a few people, but being a connected and developing and shaping our civic university agreement is an integral strand, a gold thread which runs through our strategic plan. And the significance of the first slide here of changing the connected university, which is how we're currently positioning ourselves, is that my single mission is to move from referring to us as the connected university to everybody referring to us as our connected university. And I think that's something which came through the Commission's work. It's the pride that students and staff, but also our wider communities have in their identity with us. So moving on, I hope, just to give you a sense of the journey that we are on. Our Connected University strategy was established in 2016, and one of the key strands of that is a connected communities framework. We'd been developing and unpacking, if you like, what it means to be a connected university, what it is to add value to our place, when the Civic University Commission came along. So it was timely for us to be able to, with confidence, sign a pledge, because it fitted in very much the work we were doing. Others have commented that one of the key things is understanding how we maximize the impact that we're having, but also how we're able to measure and quantify the impact. And I suppose, like many other institutions, we were aware and could point to a number of examples of things that we were doing and impacts we were having, but we didn't really have any oversight at an institutional level to help us prioritize. So we have conducted with Hatcher Generis a baseline impact report, and this is not new stuff. I know many universities have got similar reports, but they often focus on the kind of economic impact, expressing the GVA added from the university. And we wanted to do more than that and really start to try and get under the skin of the social impacts that we were having. And the process of doing that was as important as the outcome. And what it told us was that we didn't really have a systematic way of collecting evidence of our impact. We had to go far and wide across the institution to find different examples. So it was really helpful in terms of them being able to produce a framework which gives us a baseline. One of the key things which I'll refer to briefly, and there's a video link which you'll be able to follow up at the end, is that we have been for some time engaged in participatory community research, and we've established a Civic Fellowship. And I won't try to get the detail of that, but this is a recognition, a formal recognition of key members of the public who are working over a sustained period of time in partnership with us. And that is one of our key mechanisms of truly being engaged in understanding the needs of our local communities. We are at a phase now where we were hoping to have completed consultations and be signing off agreement by the summer, but as Jane has said and others, COVID has come along. I won't repeat the things that many of you will say about how we've responded to COVID, but I genuinely feel that what it's done is actually strengthen and reinforce the impacts and the positioning, test out the strength of our communication and partnerships as a civic university, which positions us well. So we'll be working towards civic agreement being signed off in the autumn, and that will be an integral part of our strategy as we move towards 2030. Our current strategy, as again, this will be similar for many of you, really puts students first. But it also, within our 3 strands of connecting communities and innovative and applied learning and talented people, refers to our university as being an intellectual hub for the communities that we serve. And therefore, our place-based civic role is absolutely central within our strategy. And what this means, therefore, is that this work is very live and active in terms of discussion with our Board of Governors, with executive, and it's owned really across the university rather than be something which a small group of people have been convened in order to lead. Something's happened to that slide, which has changed it a bit, so apologies for that. But what this was going to point to is the fact that it deals with the what is our region. And like Jane, I don't think it's particularly helped to define tightly a geography in which we see our civic role. So the concentric circles represent the fact that our immediate focus is indeed Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. We have campuses across the county, but we also have a London campus. We have connections, as all universities do, right across the UK, and we have over 13,000 students studying internationally. So our engagement is really with places. We have quantified our impact, particularly in terms of Stoke-on-Trent, but we absolutely, as Jane described, have got partnerships in the US and in Asia. We see that as a key opportunity to leverage benefits for our place from our international connections in the same way as we can see similarities, for instance, with our link to the University of Alabama in the US. So apologies that that slide hasn't quite translated. Our Connected Communities framework puts at the centre our view as a connected university. Around that, we build the fact that as a university, the important element of that are its people. And Brian had asked about students. So our students are heavily involved both in our current civic work, but also in shaping how we can increase the impact of that. The next set of circles are really about the different kinds of activities that we engage with. And all of that is into our values and placing us as an intellectual hub. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I think it's important, and what we're seeking to do is not to develop a very detailed document setting out a list of projects and plans, but a future-proof document which is based on some key principles. So I won't read through those, but you'll get these, and our approach therefore is to take and set out a clear set of principles which guide our civic activity. One of the things which I will just put in there is that as well as discussing what we do, we also need a clear set of processes to decide where we're not going to engage, because we can't be all things to all people. We can lead on some, we can support other anchor institutions and civic partners, but there will be some activities where we simply have to say, oh, these are not things that we can commit to at the present time. So bringing that together, we have our framework. When we have undertaken our impact evaluation, the different coloured hexagons or octagons, I'm not sure which they are there, represent the different areas in which we've now developed baseline measures of our impact. And there's a lot more that I could say about that in terms of our economic impact, our commitment to social mobility in terms of our access and participation plan is absolutely key. We are in a region with very low progression to higher education, low skills, etc. So what we have is bringing together a set of principles and processes with a clear evaluation framework which sets out metrics, where we are at the moment, and forms the basis for negotiation and discussion with our stakeholders as to where we believe we can add most value. I'm afraid some of these slides have become somewhat distorted, so I'm going to skip over one, and I know time is pressing. I'll just, on the final slide, refer to our Civic Fellows. I'm happy to provide more detail of these, but this is really about truly valuing the contributions of the public. And this is a process which, similar to the appointment of professorial appointments, we have a formal process now to recognise individuals who are undertaking work which really champions our civic mission and connects us in different ways. And Paul has given me a note so that we don't have to go through the video. It's about 2.5 minutes. But I think the individuals, some of our civic fellows here, talk about what this means to them to be representing the university. And it goes back to my first slide about, you know, that pride in a university, the recognition of the value it brings, and being proud to be staffs. So I'll stop there. There's I know time is pressing, but I'm very happy to share slides. I'm more than happy to answer questions, and would be delighted to follow up and speak to colleagues after today's event. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ieuan, and apologies for the briskness with which we need to move through everything. We'll take some questions in a second. Just reminding you again that we will send you the links. The video that Ieuan mentioned is really worth watching. The Connected University Strategy is a great read, a really thoughtful approach, and provided the foundation ahead of, as Ieuan said, ahead of the Civic Commission. And I think that's a really interesting thing I picked up from your presentation, Ieuan, that you talked about the sort of origins of this work in 2016 and showed us something of that journey, but the need for these kinds of relationships to be built upon long-standing trust and you know, and community, really, and that you cannot just turn these buttons and switch these things on. They need really patient and long-term work. And I think you've just one example, the Get Talking Hardship project that that there is a link to here is just one of the many examples of the fantastic work that has been going on at Staffordshire for many years to build really collaborative relationships that really deliver social value. And picking up on that theme of social value, there was a question about how you've been measuring and thinking about value. So from Charlotte, she says, what does going beyond economic impact and GVA mean in terms of measuring social impact? Can you expand on, give examples of the baseline measurements you referred to? And I'll hand that question to you but just before you respond, Jan, just to say again that we want to share resources and approaches, and at Staffordshire, a lot of thinking has been going on around social impact and measuring social impact. And of course, that relates to things that we're all worrying about in terms of the KE Concordat and the KEF and the HEBKE review. And this whole sense of how do we develop really meaningful indicators of the value of this work. And we feel that's a very productive theme for this network to go into in more depth. But just to put you on the spot, yeah, and anything you'd like to say to Charlotte about how you're approaching your baseline and how you're thinking about social impact and what you're drawing on to help you do that work well.
Yes, thank you very much. The short answer is it's very difficult and very challenging. It's the question that everybody's working on. So the process of going through a baseline social and economic impact assessment included looking at many other universities and what they've done, how they're going about it. And to disappoint you but not surprise you, when it falls into two categories, I suppose, being very simplistic. There are numbers, and so we can all put numbers against certain financial impacts, and those are fairly traditional. When you start looking at impact, social impacts, you realize that whatever data you collect, that really you've got to start looking at qualitative data. So what we're looking at is how we can more systematically now develop case studies and how we can collect evidence which isn't just in the form of words, but also in terms of video, in terms of personal testimonies, but do that in a systematic way. So if you take the analogy, I suppose, of the REF, where you're looking at impact case studies alongside citations, etc., and everything. What we're starting to embark on is to look at ways in which we can gather evidence of the impact that we're having for our stakeholders, which goes beyond simply numbers. And I think the KEF leaves that open for individual institutions to start shaping that work in terms of how they do that. So we're not at the position where we have got clearly defined KPIs for each of those. It is still very much work in progress, but what we've been reassured on, I suppose, is that we're no further behind or no further ahead, or perhaps slightly further ahead in some cases than others. But the answer is really it's going to be a multiplicity of different forms of evidence that we're gathering as we engage with key stakeholders that will give us a more rounded picture of the impact that we can deliver.
Great. Thank you.